Of the ones of you that were here last week, I don't know how many of you took the sort of challenge I gave you to go home and to write down the blessings of God. And but I did, and brought my list this morning, and in broad strokes, in large categories, I had down 30 different things that were blessings of God. Now let me just explain that when I say broad strokes and all that. One of mine on my list is a loving church family. And if you don't believe that's a blessing, go somewhere where there isn't one, and you will know how much of a blessing a loving church family is. But I didn't go through and go, Joyce is a blessing, and Jared is a blessing, and April is a blessing. It could have been 100. Just in that category, in that broad stroke. I have on my list a loving wife, but I could have listed a lot of other things as well. So that one thing could have been 10 or 15 other things. So I came up with 30 different blessings of life. And as we talked about last week, all of these fit into one of two categories. Some of them are earthly blessings. The first one I had was air. That's pretty important. And if you don't think it is, just go a minute or two without it and see how you think. And then even I have down here at the bottom of the list, air conditioning. It's going to be just about a month. That will be a huge, huge blessing. And having ours acted up just a couple of weeks ago, it reminded me of how big of a blessing that is. So some of them are earthly blessings. And as we said last week, all of those things that are earthly blessings are temporary. They're great, and I certainly enjoy them and love them and all that, but they're temporary. And some of the things on this list are spiritual blessings. I have down here God's grace. I have down here that God's mercies are new every day. I mean, that's a blessing. Because I'm telling you, I've got it this morning. I got His mercies this morning, but I'm going to need them again tomorrow morning, and Tuesday morning, and Wednesday morning. And so just the fact that His blessings were new every day, His faithfulness forever, His unconditional love, not conditional love, His unconditional love for us. And so as we are doing this series entitled The Blessed Life, hopefully you did that exercise just to show you how blessed you are. Because a lot of times we mope around and think that, well, we're just not blessed at all, or we're not as blessed as much as somebody else, and those kinds of things. But God certainly has blessed us in tremendous ways. We stopped last week with this point that all of God's blessings have a bigger purpose than what we see. All of God's blessings have a bigger purpose than what we see. I was sharing yesterday at the Family Promise thing that God's blessings don't pour on us just so we can be a sponge and soak it up for ourselves. God doesn't, it's been a while, God doesn't give you a raise just so you can go buy you a new toy. Now, is it okay to buy a new toy? Certainly. And it's great to invite your pastor to come and enjoy those new toys when you get them. But God pours His blessings on us because He wants to use us and make us a conduit of His blessings to other people. Why? For His glory. You see, we're able to be a testimony for Him. We're able to be a light for Him in a dark world. Last week as I shared that about His blessings have a bigger purpose, almost immediately after service, I had several different people coming to me talking about some storms that they were going through. Some tough times that they're going through. And they are tough times. There's nothing light and nothing easy about the things that were shared with me last week, but it got me thinking that sometimes it's hard to see God's blessings. It's hard to believe in God's blessings. And it's even hard to receive God's blessings when we're going through those storms of life. So this week I sort of took a different path than I was planning on. I said, I'm going to find somebody in the Scriptures. I want to find somebody's story that it really didn't look like God was blessing them, but He really was the whole way through. And I found this man, this guy, actually starts as a teenager named Joseph. Joseph. Some of you already know the story. You know the beginning, the middle, and some of you already know the end. And if you do, I just want you to walk with me through this story today. If you've never heard of Joseph and never heard his story, it's pretty incredible. It covers about 12, 13 chapters in the book of Genesis. And we're not going to read all of that today, but I do want to encourage you this week sometime just to read his whole story in its entirety, because it's a pretty powerful thing that happens in the life of Joseph. But Joseph's story starts in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. And I sort of want to just make this point today of seeing God's blessings in the storm, seeing God's blessing in the tough time and through the tough times that we go through. And again, I know it's easy for us to get our eyes on our circumstances, our eyes on our situation, our eyes on our problem that we have. But I just want you to know today that God is still at work and God is blessing us. Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to read a lot of scripture today in short bursts. So hopefully if you have your Bible, you're there. If not, I think the verses will be up behind me. But I just want you to follow along with this. Genesis chapter 37. It says, "So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph, who is Jacob's youngest son, was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half brothers, the son of B and Z." I just thought that would be easier for all of us if we just referred to those ladies that way. "But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Now, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest. They couldn't say a kind word about him." Now, let me ask, how many of you are the youngest in your family? All right, just so you know, your siblings don't like you. They love you, but they don't like you. Because the youngest is always the twinkle of the eye. The youngest is always the baby. Monica and her sister were born really close together, and then 9 years after Monica was born, her brother was born. And even as the in-law, I didn't like him. Because you just see the baby get away with so many things that the older ones didn't get away with. I'll never forget, I'll tell this story. Hopefully it won't come back to haunt me, but when Monica and her sister were going off to college, they needed cars. And so their parents did what they could to help get them a car, get them into a car. Monica had this little Geo, was it a Sprint or a Metro, or about the smallest Chevrolet you could buy. It was when you started it up, the mice in the engine kicked their legs really fast. It was just a small little 5-speed, couldn't even afford the automatic. But she did that. Her payment was like $110 a month or something to make the payment on that. But it was transportation. And when Monica's brother was getting ready to go off to college, now you realize there's a difference in girls and boys, and the parents were really worried about him sort of going off and just going sort of crazy. So they're like, "We really want you to go to Liberty," where Monica and her sister, "We really want you to go to Liberty." He's like, "Well, I really want to go over here with my buddy. I want to go to that college." So he drove off to Liberty University in a brand new 300 ZX. You see why we don't like the babies? Monica drove this mice machine back and forth to Liberty, hundreds of miles over the course of 4 years, and then he drives off in a 300 ZX. And so we harassed him about it, and years later, Monica's mom fessed up. Yes, it was our fault. We shouldn't have done that. We were bribing him to go where we wanted him to go. We knew that. We just wanted you to admit it. But see, younger siblings are often that way. And it was the same way with Joseph and his brothers. And besides that, he was a tattletale. Right? We don't like tattletales. You don't like it when your brother or your sister go and rat on you and tell mom and dad something that you did. Well, that's what Joseph had done. He had talked to his dad and said, "Look, my brothers are out in the fields and they're doing some bad things and you need to know about it." And so Jacob loved Joseph more than any other. Now let's pick the story up down a few more verses in verse 18. Again, they don't like him. They can't say a kind word about him. They hate Joseph. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, just to skip some verses, Jacob said, go check on your brothers out in the field. Go check, see what they're doing, check on the flocks. And so when they saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. That's what I'm saying. They love you, but they don't like you. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns. We could tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into the empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off that beautiful robe he was wearing, and then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty and there was no water in it. Then just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming towards them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum and balm and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain by killing our brother? We have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midian traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. Here's my first point today. God's blessings often come through pain. God's blessings often come through pain. I'm sure as a 17-year-old young man that it was painful to him, if not physically, emotionally, to be sold away from his dad and his family, from all the comforts that he knew of all the blessings that he knew of his home. I mean, he was the apple of his daddy's eye. He was the most loved of all of them. And so I'm sure, again, if it wasn't even for the physical pain that he went through, being sold into slavery, taking an 11-day trip down to Egypt, being sold on the trading block as a slave, even if it wasn't for the physical part of it, the emotional part of it had to be torture for Joseph. And let's just be clear, what the brothers did was clearly sin. There's no way they could rhyme or reason around it. There's no way we need to sugarcoat it today. What the brothers did was sin, and they sold their brother. They go back and tell their dad the big lie, that, hey, he was destroyed. He's off in the wilderness. He has died. Here's his coat. We've got it. We found it. And so they lie to his dad. They sell their brother into slavery. 20 pieces of silver. Ring any bells to anybody? 20 pieces of silver should remind us. And so here's the question. How does God's blessings come from sin? How can God bless when there's been sin? I mean, his brothers sinned. How can God bless this situation? And it brings me to Romans 8:28. It says that we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Now, I don't do this a lot, but I looked up that word everything. Like, what does that mean there? God causes everything to work together. Everything. What does that mean? Well, it's actually a Greek word. If I say this wrong, you'll forgive me, but it's really tapanda, T-A-P-A-N-D-A, and it's really sophisticated. It means all. So everything means all, but it means it in a different aspect. It means all from the aspect of the total picture. In other words, in this particular situation, it would mean all in the aspect of Joseph's entire life. But then it also takes it to every step of the way. So it's looking at, God causes everything. Everything in Joseph's life is going to work together for good. Everything. Every little step of the way. Even the step of sin of his brothers selling him into slavery. Even the step of emotional and physical pain of being sold as a slave, as a young man as a slave. Even the pain of physical hard work. I imagine, again, the babies always get out of it. I imagine he didn't have to do a lot of the hard work or the heavy lifting. No, his brothers did a lot of that. But now he's going to be a slave, and he's going to be doing the hard work, doing the hard labor that he thinks is coming his way. And so when we say that God works everything in our lives, God works everything in my entire life together for good every step of the way. So when you're going through a tough situation, you're going through a tough time, you may even go through a spell or a time where maybe somebody has sinned against you. You may be going through a tough time of your life. You need to know that God will work everything of your entire life together for good every step of the way. And we need to remember that because, one, it helps us in those times when we're going through those to look for God's blessings and to see God's blessings and not be blinded by the storm or the tough time that we are in. A few chapters over, Joseph's story continues in chapter 39. When Joseph was taken to Egypt, so he's been sold to these traders, they take him to Egypt. He was purchased, okay, so he was going to become a slave, purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the house of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything that he did. This pleased Potiphar, and he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's house for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly. His crops and his livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything that he owned with Joseph there. He didn't worry about anything except what kind of food he would eat. Joseph was a very handsome man, a well-built young man. We can all relate to that. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. It says there that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph when he was sold as a slave to Potiphar. The Lord was with Joseph as he's away from his family. The Lord is with Joseph as he's been put to the task of overseeing Potiphar's house. And the Lord was with him, and it said he succeeded at everything he did. And that leads me to my second point today, and that is this, that sometimes God's blessings come later. Sometimes God's blessings come later. Again, they're always in the grand scheme of our entire life. And though you and I can only see maybe days and weeks and months at a time, God can see the whole stretch of our life. And sometimes God's blessings come later. They didn't come on the 11-day trip to Egypt. Just imagine that. Let's just take that little aspect. When he was sold as a slave, from where he was at to where they were going was about 11 days walking. Now, most of us don't want to do 11 hours of walking, maybe 11 minutes of walking. Imagine having to be sold in there and being taken away again from your family and everything that you've known, to walk in the heat of the day, to walk to Egypt, to be standing up on the trading block, to be sold as a slave, to be bought, and yet Joseph does not see God's blessings. Verse 6 says, Potiphar gave Joseph complete responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. Sometimes God's blessings come later. One of the things that we were singing about and Tucker prayed about was in the tough times, we have to have that faith. We have to have that trust. We have to have that know that God is in control. Know that God is with us. Know that God is looking over us. And sometimes in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the tough time, in the middle of the heartache and the heartbreak and the pain and the agony and the tears, sometimes it's hard to remember that, but we have to. That sometimes God's blessings come later. Now, the story just began there about Potiphar's wife looking at Joseph lustfully, trying to get him to come and sleep with him to come sleep with her, and he refuses. In verse 8 we pick up, it says, Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? And get this, it would be a sin against God. One of the things that's so impressive to me about Joseph is, even in the middle of everything that has happened, he's not lost sight of who that would be a sin against. Many of us would say, yeah, I deserve this. Yeah, God, you brought me to this place. I'm going to do what I've got to do to survive in this place. But Joseph said, even in that situation, he didn't say it would be a sin against Potiphar. He said it would be a sin against God. She kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around, and he went in to do his work. She came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, come on and sleep with me. Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. When she saw that she was holding his cloak and he had fled, she called out to the servants, and soon all the men came running. Look, she said, my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed. When he had heard my scream, he ran outside and got away, but he left his cloak behind with me. She kept the cloak with her until her husband came home, and then she told him the story. That Hebrew slave you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me, she said. But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his cloak with me. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. Here's one of the things about this whole story. Joseph gets sold into slavery by his brothers. A tough situation, a storm, horrible for us. And yet when he gets there to Egypt, the Lord is with him, right? The Lord didn't leave him, the Lord was with him, and so he makes him successful in everything that he does. In this situation, Joseph did not sleep with Potiphar's wife for the main reason it would have been a sin against God. And now Joseph ends up in prison for doing what was right. He had every opportunity to do what was wrong. I imagine if he would have went in and slept with Potiphar's wife, she would not have went around telling people, because that would have been her head. But Joseph did what was right and ended up in prison. You see, sometimes in the tough times of life, it's hard to see God's blessings. And I'm sure for Joseph, he's been sold as a slave, and now he's being sent to prison for not sleeping with his boss's wife. And it comes in as much as we sang, as we prayed, that we have to have that faith and that trust. And that's something that, as we read the entirety of Joseph's story, I do think he never lost. Whether he was in prison, whether he was a slave, regardless of what he was doing, I think he never lost the fact that God was with him. So he's in prison. Verse 21 picks up, it said, the Lord was with Joseph in prison. Just as he was when he went to Potiphar's house, the Lord was with Joseph in prison, and he showed him his faithful love. That's a blessing. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden had put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that had happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. You see, here's the thing. Joseph still don't know why God has him going through all of this. We're going to get to the end of the story in just a couple of minutes, and when we get there, it's like a big puzzle. We'll all put it together and go, oh, I see how that did that, and that accomplished that, and that moved to that point, and that happened with that. But Joseph doesn't know. Joseph woke up one day, the next day he wakes up in prison. Now he's in prison, and what has happened? The Lord has used him again to find favor among the prison warden, and he's put him in charge of everything. And what did he do? Just like he did before, everything Joseph does succeeds. Why? Not because of who Joseph is, but because of who God is. Luke 18:27 says, what is impossible for people is possible with God. And so the Lord has moved Joseph, a 17-year-old, through these 2 or 3 stages so far. We're not at the end of the story yet. In Genesis 41, again, you need to just read Genesis 31 to 44, 37 to 44 if you can do that this week to get the entire story. But at 33, something else happens, another turn in the story, if you will. Basically, Joseph is in prison. Pharaoh's had these dreams. He wants people to interpret the dreams for him. No one can do it, but guess who can do it? Joseph. And so after he interprets these dreams for Joseph, here's what Pharaoh said. Joseph does it for Pharaoh. Here's what Pharaoh says. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him. This is what Joseph is telling Pharaoh because of the dreams. There are going to be years of success and plenty, but then it's going to be followed up by years of famine. And so Joseph is telling Pharaoh, you should find an intelligent and wise man, put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let him collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years and have him gather the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouse, store it away, guard it so that there will be food in the cities. That way, there will be enough food to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, the famine will destroy the land. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. From a shepherd boy, the baby of the family, to a slave. From being put in charge of Potiphar's household to prison. From being in prison and interpreting the dreams and being brought out. Now Pharaoh has put Joseph in charge, second in command of the entire land of Egypt. You see how the story is beginning to progress. You see how things are beginning to piece together. How would God have gotten Joseph to Egypt? How would that have happened? How could that have came to be? Now, where is Joseph going to be during the 7 good years? In Egypt. Where is Joseph going to be in the 7 bad years? In Egypt, right next to the king. Second in command, kneel down to him. No one can touch him, no one can harm him, no one can do anything to him. Do you think he feels blessed? You bet. You bet. I don't know if you've ever done this before. Have you ever seen someone on the street and just sort of gone and gotten them a McDonald's burger or a McDonald's meal or something and taken it to them? Have you ever done that? I don't know if you've ever done that. You know what's so odd about that when you do that? You don't ever hear, I've never heard one person go, I don't like pickles. Oh, you got me Dr. Pepper? I drink Sprite. You know why those people are never that way? Because they don't know where the next meal's coming from, and when that meal comes to them, they feel blessed by whatever is in that bag. You know what happens to us a lot of times? Because we could go to Sonic, or we could go to Five Guys, or we could go to Burger King. You know, a lot of us, we go, ooh, McDonald's, ugh. Because we have these different options. We have these different opportunities. We say, well, I could go anywhere and get a hamburger. I don't want to go there. But for the people that are there that receive the blessing, to them, they're not picky. And see, one of the things that happens with us, one, living in the country that we live in, being blessed how we are blessed, and as I look across this room, knowing the blessings that we have as families, that we have as individuals, that we have in our jobs and with families and all of those different things, is sometimes we become picky about God's blessings. We almost sometimes become entitled to God's blessings, and we begin to say things like this to God. God, no, this is how I want you to bless me. No, you know, God gave you air today. God gave you a bed to sleep in today. God gave you a family that loves you today. And then you at the same time out of this side, you're going, God, here's what I want today. And we become entitled to God blessing. We expect God to do for us what we want done for us, not what He wants to do for us. In the scheme of our life, in the scheme of our whole story, you see, He sees everything. He sees the entirety and the all of it, and He sees every step along the way. Much like He did with Joseph, from a shepherd boy who was going to be killed by his brothers, to being second in charge to Pharaoh during not only the time of plenty, but now in the time of famine. And one of the things that happens is Joseph's family gets hungry. The famine's hit. They're out of food. They didn't know the famine was coming. You know why? Because they sent their brother off to Egypt. And so during their years of plenty, they're just saying they're eating up their crops and they're eating up their food. They're not saving anything. They're just thinking, man, this is awesome. But then the famine hits. They had no idea the famine was coming. And now Joseph's family back in Canaan is out of food. So Jacob sends his brothers, Joseph's brothers, his other sons, all but one, to go to Egypt to buy grain for food. Is it clicking? Is it getting... What? Who are they going to go see in Egypt? Their brother. Who are they going to go get food from in Egypt? Their brother. They don't know that. Joseph doesn't know they're coming. Who knows all that? God knows that. God knows He's sending those brothers. They're going to be face to face with the brother they sent off into slavery, that they sold for 20 pieces of silver, that they lied to their daddy about. They're going to be face to face in a matter of days, all for the purpose of buying grain and buying it. So let's see how the story develops. Again, Genesis chapter 44. The story just covers so much. It says, when his brothers were ready to leave, Joseph gave the instructions. So they've already come. Joseph noticed them right off. They did not notice Joseph. They did not recognize him. So here's what Joseph does. When his brothers were ready to leave, he gave the instructions to his palace manager, fill each of their sacks with as much grain as they could carry, and put each man's money back into the sack. So they've come in to buy the grain. They paid for it. He says, put the money back in to the sack. And then put my personal silver cup at the top of the youngest brother's sack, along with the money for his grain. So the manager did just as Joseph instructed. Verse 10. "That's fair," the man replied, "but only the one who stole the cup will be my slave." They basically have gotten stopped as they leave. And he says, bring them back. He says, okay, here's what's going to happen. The only one who stole my cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go free. Now, why is it important that he's going to keep the youngest? Because the youngest has now become the daddy's favorite. When Joseph was gone, he just turned his attention to the next youngest. And because when they left, the dad said, I'm not going to let you take them because he might end up dead. And they said, no, Dad, we'll take care of him. They all quickly took their sacks from the back of the donkeys and opened them. The palace manager searched the brother's sack from the oldest to the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers saw this, they tore their clothing in despair, and they loaded their donkeys again and returned to the city. Joseph was still in his palace when Judah and his brothers left. And they fell to the ground before him. So basically they've gotten caught. They've sort of been set up, but they've gotten caught. They've come back to the city. And now Joseph in chapter 45 is going to say this. And I want you to hang on with me. I know I'm just dragging through, but I want you to hang on because we're really getting to where I want you to be today. Chapter 45, it says, Joseph couldn't stand it any longer. There were many people in the room. He said to his attendants, out, all of you. So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. Please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer. And he said once again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And He is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all Egypt. Here's the final point today. God's blessings are often a choice. God's blessings are often our choice. Joseph could have done so many things at that moment. He could have thrown his brothers in prison and left them there for years. He could have put his brothers to the work of a slave. He could have had his brothers killed. He had the power in his hands. He could have had his brothers eliminated. He could have done all the different things that most of us reading this story all the way through would have thought to do. But instead, he recognized them. He embraced them. And as the story goes on even further, literally he brings the family there and they are blessed through his service in Egypt. Sometimes in the middle of the storm, we have to choose to receive God's blessings. Sometimes when God's blessings come pouring on us, there's still part of us that maybe wants revenge. I'll never forget one time there was a rumor going around Perry, and you know how that happens. I mean, 2 people talk at the square, and by that afternoon, it's all throughout the town. And so this rumor about someone had come up, and it was spreading throughout the town, and it was somebody I knew. And instantly, they wanted to take action. They were wanting to drop the hammer. And I said, no, just let the truth will come out. Just let the truth happen. And so it went on for a couple of weeks, actually, and it got more and more people talking. And I actually had somebody call me and said, I need to ask you some questions. I said, okay. And so I went to their house, and they sat down and said, I need to know about this rumor that I'm hearing. And I said, well, here's the truth. And I told them what the truth was. And the person sat there and they went, oh, that's the truth? Okay. I said, yeah. I said, I can call the person right now. You want to talk to him? I get him on the phone? No. You see, sometimes we could have said, yeah, I want to get him on the phone. I'm going to drop the hammer. I'm ready to just hit the pavement. Let's go. Joseph could have done so many things in that instance when he was face to face with his brothers. And yet he saw at that moment everything. You see, some of us, we struggle, and all of us struggle to see everything. In that moment, Joseph knew slavery, prison, false accusation. In that moment, Joseph knew, this is why I'm here. And here's my talk to you today. Here's what I will say to you today. Know, trust, have the faith that Tucker prayed about and sang about this morning of everything. Everything. And right now you may be in what you consider to be slavery of some sort. You may be in a storm that feels like a prison. You may be in a storm that feels like you want revenge. But what I want to say to you today is trust God with everything. Every step of the way. And when His blessings come your way, choose the blessing. Choose the blessing. I want to encourage you to do two things this week. One, I do want to encourage you to read this entire story. Genesis 37 to Genesis 49. It's about 12 chapters. It's a lot of reading, but it's an incredible story. And I skipped over, so I know you think I've talked forever. I skipped over a bunch of stuff this morning. I want to encourage you to read that. But here's the second thing I want to challenge you to do. I want you to choose to bless 7 people this week. 7 people. 7 different people. It doesn't have to be something grand. It doesn't. Just pick 7 people. I pick 7 because there's 7 days. Maybe you'll pick one day I want to bless this person, one day I want to bless that person. I don't know. Maybe you have 7 people in your office. You want to bless all those people in your office. Pick 7 people this week and find a way to bless them. It could be something very small. I know all of you are thinking, well, I don't have money to do that. It doesn't have to even cost anything financially. An encouraging word, a card with a positive note in it. Choose 7 people this week and bless them this week. You see, God pours His blessings on us to flow through us. God's blessings poured on Joseph for the purpose of his family. He didn't see that all the way. But he got it, and he saw it, and he chose to do it when it was time. Let's pray.